Why hasn't the US won a major war since World War II? We're gonna break down that psychology, so now let's get started.
The tramp of soldier feet, the sway of soldier ranks, making a picture that simply shouts an epic of America mobilized for victory.
First, this video is by no means a knock against the US military. This is all basically a knock against the people in power that send the US military to carry out missions that are basically impossible to accomplish. Although the US is a superpower both economically and militarily, the US hasn't really won a major war since World War II.
At 4 a.m. on June 25, 1950, the armies of North Korea stormed across the 38th parallel, hoping to crush the South in one overwhelming offensive. North Korea hoped the U.S. would look the other way, but the American home front was being whipped into a frenzy over communist aggression. If South Korea fell to the Reds, would Japan be next? President Harry Truman immediately called for U.S. air and sea strikes. Enemy fire came from all sides. The troops were almost back to square one. In the 4 months since they'd last been here, all they'd gained were casualties.
Looking back in history to the wars the US fought since World War II, the first one that comes to mind is the Korean War.
The armistice ending the Korean War is signed in Panmunjom.
In 1953, that war ended in an armistice, or a ceasefire, where both sides decided not to fight anymore and have a DMZ, demilitarized zone.
The ceasefire line approximated the final front, which was generally along the 38th parallel. But while it ended the fighting in Korea, it did not truly end the war.
So the US did not win that war. It ended in a ceasefire. The US was involved in the Vietnam War for nearly a decade.
And we don't want our American boys to do the fighting for our Asian boys, and we don't want to get involved in a nation with 700 million people and get tied down in a land war in Asia.
U.S. troops were increasingly involved in combat missions, even if they were still listed as advisors. America was being dragged into a land war. The president now told his aide that he felt like a hitchhiker caught in a storm on a Texas highway. He couldn't run, he couldn't hide, and he couldn't make it stop.
If I pulled out, I think that our commitments would be no good anywhere. I think it would immediately trigger a situation in Thailand.
With every arrival, the commitment grew, and the road back was made all the harder.
And then finally pulled out their troops in 1973.
For the first time in 12 years, no American military forces are in Vietnam. All of our American POWs are on their way home. We have prevented the imposition of a communist government by force on South Vietnam.
War fighting continued there until 1975, where the North Vietnamese finally took over the capital of South Vietnam.
North Vietnamese troops approached the southern capital of Saigon. President Gerald Ford ordered all U.S. troops and citizens out of the country. Armed Forces Radio began playing White Christmas to signal an evacuation was underway.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Captain Gerald Berry was assigned to rescue U.S. Ambassador Graham Martin, and as Berry flew toward the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, he could see enemy tanks approaching the city.
So the U.S. clearly lost that war, and it's often marked as the first war that the U.S. has ever lost.
Privately, Johnson revealed he was a reluctant warrior, confronted with an impossible choice, either escalation or defeat.
And when the Vietnam War looked pretty bad and people were starting to think that maybe we should just pull out troops and claim loss, that hey, we lost this one, President Lyndon Johnson was often quoted as saying in private, "I'm not going to be the first U.S. president to ever lose a war." He would rather send a whole bunch of other people to be slaughtered than to actually admit defeat.
We intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms or by superior power.
Many presidents are known to be very prideful and have a lot of hubris.
This will make it necessary to increase our active fighting forces by raising the monthly draft call.
Meaning when things start to look poorly and not very winnable, they often double down instead of pulling back.
That was the Johnson style. He may not have wanted the fight, but he was used to winning and couldn't understand why America, for all its might, could be cowed by a peasant army. 58,000 American lives, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese.
Then we had the Gulf War in 1991.
Saddam ordered the Republican Guard to move south towards Iraq's border with Kuwait.
However, it's not really considered a major war in history. The reason why it was only lasted a few weeks and it was very limited in its scope.
The 30,000 troops on Kuwait's border became 100,000, but nothing was done. For 7 days, Arab leaders insisted this was bluff. Republican Guard tanks started to seal off the city.
The US was limited to pushing out Saddam Hussein from Kuwait.
American and British troops surged across the desert. This was the army that had been stationed in Europe to fight World War III against the Soviets. Now, the end of the Cold War allowed it to be unleashed against Iraq.
Although that was quite successful and the US accomplished that mission, it would not be considered a major war like World War II or Vietnam.
They would mount attacks and they would give out a yell, an Arab battle cry like, and it was terrifying.
Then we have the Afghanistan war in response to 9/11.
The fighting was often heavy, with almost no cover. The area was littered with IEDs. The Marines here were carrying out counterinsurgency's basic tenets: clear, hold, and build.
You all are not cooperating. All right, you need to understand that we are here to keep the Taliban out.
The US removed the Taliban government temporarily from Afghanistan for only the Taliban to come back into the government in 2021 when the US left Afghanistan.
Thousands more swarming Hamid Karzai International Airport, desperately trying to escape. More than 123,000 people were evacuated, bringing an end to the US's 20-year war in Afghanistan. The final withdrawal began suddenly, August 15th, when the Taliban entered the capital and took in just a couple of days Kabul. Helicopters in a mad dash began evacuating the US embassy.
Although Afghanistan was somewhat successful for a little while, as soon as the US left, it became very unsuccessful and it just went right back to Taliban rule.
2 days after their victory, the Taliban held their first press conference.
So it's difficult for the US to say that the US won that war if the Taliban was driven out and only for the Taliban to come right back into power.
Tonight, Iraqi security and coalition forces kicked off offensive operations in Fallujah.
We went in to Fallujah at about 10 p.m. and the fighting started immediately. It's pitch black outside, and we all started piling out of the troop carriers. We went in on foot, and you could see the RPGs sailing out of the city towards us. And I thought, my God, what have we gotten into here?
And the Iraq War is even more complicated.
Today, I can say that our troops in Iraq will definitely be home for the holidays.
Because in 2011, when the US pulled out troops from Iraq and ISIS began just running the country and taking over massive territory in the country,
it underlines a sort of confidence from ISIS militants to put their leader on full display in Mosul's largest mosque. This is a man with a $10 million US bounty on his head, and he's standing there at the pulpit ordering Muslims to obey him and to join the fight here.
I'm back, Obama, and I'm back because of your arrogant foreign policy towards the Islamic State.
We will send an additional 475 service members to Iraq.
Then in 2014, the U.S. got back involved in Iraq to fight counterterrorism against ISIS because Iraq became a stronghold and breeding ground for terrorists. Yes, Saddam Hussein being removed from power in Iraq was definitely the biggest win. But as far as nation building Iraq and what the U.S. was doing and the U.S.'s involvement in building a nation in Iraq, was not very successful. Are you starting to notice the pattern of wars that the US wins versus the wars that the US doesn't win? The US is terrible at nation building. And here's the thing, it's not just the US. Pretty much every country is going to be terrible at nation building. And nation building using the US military is removing someone who's currently in power in a faraway nation and then try to replace that person and then that government that's currently in power with a more favorable government to the United States. What we're finding out is that the US military is very good at winning battles. The US military could win almost any battle. However, winning a war, especially a foreign war, is what? Yes, it's holding territory. But holding territory for many years in a faraway country has turned out to be quite difficult. Do you know why? Yes, it's because it's in a faraway country. It's not your country, and it's only a matter of time before the natural course of that country takes takes over. The US can want a certain thing for a certain country, but if the people there don't want that thing, it's never gonna stick. Also, a major component is not necessarily the majority rule of the country. It's the people within the country, even if those people are a minority of the country, where if that minority group within the country wants a future for that country more than the majority group within the country wants a future, then it's going to naturally fall to the people who actually want that future more. Is whoever wants that future for that country so much that they're willing to fight and die for that future of that country, that's where that country's future will go. And psychologically, who are those people that believe in something so much that they're willing to fight and die for that future of that country? Can you guess? Yes, it's often the hyper-religious groups within the country. For example, in Afghanistan, that's how the Taliban came back into power. Most of the people in Afghanistan don't want to be ruled by the Taliban. However, the Taliban believed in whatever they believed in so much, and they were hyper-religious so much, and they believed that the country should be ruled so much in that direction that they were willing to fight and die for that future of Afghanistan, even though they were a minority group within Afghanistan. What's happening in Afghanistan is not fair. What's happening in Iran is not fair. What is happening in Cuba is not fair. You can easily name at least a dozen countries of what's going on in that country is not fair to the majority of that country. However, what we've been taught in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've been taught in all of these places is that what's going on in a country is what's going on in another country. For the US to be involved in another country's process, their regime, and trying to change regime and trying to change how each country is governed usually doesn't really turn out very well and is usually very fruitless. The reason why is because the US and other NATO countries get involved in these foreign lands. What they're doing is just trying to fight the natural course of events in each of those countries. And because it's the natural course of events in those countries, you're constantly fighting uphill. And also, it's not our country. It's their home. It's their land. It's their fight. It's not the US's fight. Imagine a faraway country came into your home country and told you how to run your country. And not coming into your country like this off of the boats and saying, oh, we're going to help you. What kind of help do you need? No. They're coming in like this, guns blazing. It's never going to feel like a very welcoming type of situation.
Iran claimed hundreds of schoolgirls were the victims of a U.S. airstrike. Sources now tell CBS News a preliminary U.S. assessment found the United States is likely to blame, but didn't intentionally strike the school.
And then imagine civilian targets being hit, your schools and churches, the place you go shopping, and then the electric is being shut down and being bombed, and then you don't have water from these people that are coming in supposedly trying to help you. Naturally, even if you had kind of favorable sentiment for your government to be overthrown, you're going to start to be kind of critical of this faraway power that's coming in and blowing up everything you ever known. So a question you may have is, how did the US win World War II when it was fought in Europe and Asia? Yes, it's because Germany specifically in Europe was not fighting in their home field advantage. Germany was expanding and fighting in countries all over Europe, so it was a lot easier to push them out of lands that was not initially theirs. It's the same reason why the Soviet Union was able to kick Germany out of the Soviet Union.
Worst of all, though, was the rapidly deteriorating Russian weather.
Through October, it's the Soviet autumn. You have snowfalls, thaw, snowfall, thaw. You get a completely muddy morass across all of central Russia. So the German offensive begins to grind to a halt.
When the one with a rifle gets killed, the one who is following picks up the rifle and shoots!
They get to 20 kilometers away from Moscow, and by that stage the weather has now turned completely. It's now full-blown Soviet winter. By the end of November, you've got more German troops in hospital with frostbite than you have with wounds.
Germany made a lot of fatal mistakes in a land that wasn't initially theirs. They didn't know anything about that land. They were just going because it was the next thing to do. Home field advantage is probably the most critical advantage you could possibly have in war. Imagine if the US military didn't get involved and China just decided to go and try to take the United States. Do you know how long that would last? With all their advanced weaponry, yeah, they can take the land for a little while if the US military did not get involved. But they could never really hold the land. The Chinese military alone would not be able to hold the United States against its will. You can't just have a few Chinese tanks driving around your city every once in a while. That's not really holding the country, and the country will eventually resist and uprise against that. And this home field advantage fact that we're talking about is the same reason why the British Empire fell, and all their colonies eventually became independent. It's easy to win a battle and control a country very temporarily, but long term, it's very difficult to control that country. All of this is saying is that the US getting involved in foreign wars is typically fruitless long term. The natural courses of events long term will play out in those countries. And fighting in a foreign country is typically very difficult. You know why?
Iran's geography is a natural fortress. Encircled by towering mountain ranges, it naturally repels invaders. To the north, the Alborz Mountains shield Tehran, abruptly climbing from the Caspian Sea's shores, funneling any assault into deadly choke points. Southern coasts along the Persian Gulf lead straight into Zagros foothills, complicating amphibious landings. Ground invasion of Iran isn't just tough, it's a strategic nightmare.
Yeah, because not only do you not know the terrain of that country and know all the idiosyncrasies of that country, but you also need to bring all your supplies, including people, for that war. Meanwhile, that country is just sitting there and you're just like, okay, come at us because we're ready. We know our country, we know our land, we know our climate, we know all the best places to kind of set booby traps and kind of get you because it's our land, it's our home. We've known this country for generations, and all of a sudden this foreign force comes in and is like, okay, we're going to tell you how to do things. As you've gathered, very rarely are those types of operations successful long term. Playing defense in war is a million times easier than playing offense. The only way for offense to win long term in a faraway country, do you know how? I'm not recommending that this is how it should be done, but psychologically, you bring them to their knees.
After Japan rejected an ultimatum to stop fighting following Germany's surrender,
that bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb.
The US launched a second bombing mission on the city of Nagasaki.
This may include weapons of mass destruction and terrible things. Things that I don't think any of us want to see happen. But that's how these historical rulers like Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire expanded so massively in such a short amount of time, is that they ruled their conquered countries with an iron fist. I'm not saying that's how it should be done or anything like that, I want to be clear, but that's how they actually got the countries they conquered to actually comply. It's very difficult to create compliance in those situations when people in the country are not afraid to rise up against the foreign force that has come into their country. Psychologically, the foreign force would typically instill fear in the people they've conquered.
I'm worried about overcommitting our military around the world. I want to be judicious in its use. I just don't think it's the role of the United States to walk into a country and say, we do it this way, so should you.
Andy Card, White House Chief of Staff, whispered to the president a second plane had hit the World Trade Center. America was under attack.
If we do have to take action, do you think it will be a long war or a short war?
My own judgment, based on my time as Secretary of Defense and having operated in this area in the past, I'm confident that our troops will be successful, and I think it'll go relatively quickly. But you can't
months,
count on that. Weeks rather than months.
Looking back, Keane says that the war plans drafted by Secretary Rumsfeld and Commanding General Tommy Franks did not include adequate plans for securing the country.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The soldiers thought they were all going home.
Now in Iran, we've seen this story before. It starts out small and then it expands and expands further and further as the United States or any other foreign country gets further and further involved in these foreign wars. And before you know it, it's over a decade that you're involved in that war.
George Ball warned the president that having jumped on the back of the Tiger, he could no longer control the moment he might choose to get off.
Maybe President Trump will just claim victory at some point and be like, okay, we won, change the regime, we bombed and we did what we needed to do and we're out, which is probably why the military objectives in Iran are kind of vague. By having vague goals, you can easily find an off-ramp of how to get out of that situation. Hopefully, we get out of that situation and we don't have any more American casualties in the process. Now in the comments, how long do you think the United States is going to be involved in this military operation in Iran? Do you think it's going to be just a few more weeks, a month, years, decades? Let everyone know in the comments below. Subscribe for more. And if you want exclusive content and channel perks, hit that join button now below, because your support makes all of this possible. Every president, every leader just seems to think, I'm the exception. That was because they made that mistake. They made that mistake. This time is different. That's a recipe for disaster. See you next time.